Thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Senator Conroy.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. Madam Acting Deputy President, at the release of the Coalition Broadband policy in April 2013, when asked about the independent review and the cost-benefit analysis that he was planning for the NBN, Prime Minister Abbott said, and I quote, "Look, it will be a fully independent review. It may be the Productivity Commission, although we're conscious of the fact that the Productivity Commission has a very heavy workload. It may be Infrastructure Australia. But one way or another, there will be a full, independent review of telecommunications going forward, of broadband going forward, and that will obviously include a cost-benefit analysis." Well, sadly, Madam Acting Deputy President, this has proven to just be another coalition broken promise. The question is, why did they break this promise? It's quite clear that Infrastructure Australia and the Productivity Commission would have been too independent for Mr Turnbull's liking. So independent, in fact, that they would have likely come to the same conclusion that the last NBN expert panel arrived at, that fibre to the node is not a cost-effective upgrade path to fibre to the premise. The Minister knows a bit about evaluating risk, and the risk of receiving actually independent advice was clearly too great, Madam Acting Deputy President. What Mr Turnbull needed was someone who would put objectivity to one side and come up with the result that the government and Mr Turnbull wanted. Who could that be? Who could fit this bill for Mr Turnbull? Well, Madam Acting Deputy President, it was none other than that Liberal stooge and part-time Australian columnist, Henry Ergas. This is the same Henry Ergas whose credibility was shredded by the Australian Competition Tribunal in a judgment made in 2004. This is what the tribunal, whose president at the time was the eminent Justice Alan Goldberg, AO, QC, had to say about Mr Henry Ergas, and I quote, "Mr Ergas appeared reluctant to respond to questions whose answers might have been adverse to the case put by the party calling him. Such an attitude and conduct of an expert witness leads to a conclusion of partiality and an inability to express an objective opinion upon which reliance can be placed." This is the Australian Competition Tribunal saying quite clearly that Mr Henry Ergas has an inability to express an opinion that you can rely on. Not my words, Madam Acting Deputy President, the words of the Australian Competition Tribunal with the eminent Justice Goldberg as President. If this was an audition for future Liberal Party work, well, Mr Ergas passed it with flying colours. Mr Ergas is the person that Mr Turnbull has turned to do his dirty work for years. In 2008, Mr Ergas was hired by Mr Turnbull to do a root and branch review of Australia's tax system. It was a review so impressive, it was of such quality that it never to this day has been released publicly. It's never been released publicly. And when Mr Ergas is not writing reviews that are kept in the bottom of a drawer, he's writing dodgy NBN analysis. In 2009, in a notorious paper on the NBN, Mr Ergas predicted that NBN prices would be $133 for metropolitan customers a month and $380 a month for non-metro customers. Now, Madam Acting Deputy President, I have some inside knowledge here. I know that you are connected to the National Broadband Network. It's your home.
I do.
And could I ask you, Are you paying $380 a month for your service?
No.
No. Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. You're not. Of course, this averages out to around $170 a month nationally. Compare that to the actual prices on the NBN today, which start at $29.95. And you get a picture of how inaccurate Henry Ergas's forecasting stills really are. $171 a month versus $29.95. But no, let's hire him. Let's hire him. I haven't even mentioned, Ms. Acting Deputy President, that Mr. Henry Ergas moonlighted as a Liberal Party booth captain on election day for Liberal Senator Zed Sejalja. Seriously, moonlighted as a booth captain. But if you don't care about accuracy or fairness, well, Henry Ergas is your man. He's your go-to guy. Ms. Acting Deputy President, this is the man that Mr. Malcolm Turnbull has appointed to his independent expert panel. Ms. Acting Deputy President, the Australian taxpayer is forking out $1,400 a day over 6 months so that Mr. Ergas can provide Mr. Turnbull with the answer that he wants. That's $263,000 of taxpayer money since the panel was announced to Mr. Henry Ergas. But most galling, Ms. Acting Deputy President, is that this money is going to a person who once sat before a Senate committee and said that a cost-benefit analysis of the NBN could be done in 3 days. Done in 3 days. That's an effective daily rate, Ms. Acting Deputy President, for Mr. Henry Ergas of $87,500 a day. What an absolute sham. This is extraordinary largesse that is being doled out to a booth captain for the Liberal Party and at very obvious cursory examination, another mate of Mr. Turnbull on the taxpayer purse. But you might think that was enough for Mr. Ergas and Mr. Turnbull. But no, he isn't the only member of the CBA panel, Ms. Acting Deputy President. What about the others? Let's look at who's doing the work. And in those immortal words of the Blues Brothers, well, Mr. Turnbull is putting the band back together. There is, of course, Dr. Alex Robson of Griffith University. Now, Dr. Robson was a senior economic advisor to Mr. Turnbull from January 2008 to January 2009. And surprise, surprise, he's also a protege of Mr. Ergas. Mr. Robson was co-author with Mr. Ergas of that ill-fated paper I mentioned that wrongly forecast that you'd be paying $380 a month, Ms. Acting Deputy President, averaging at $170 a month. He's the co-author of a document so wildly wrong, it's humiliating. And Mr. Robson, it might come as a surprise to you, Ms. Acting Deputy President, also worked at Mr. Ergas's firm, Concept Economics, which is on the public record of having gone belly up in 2009. In fact, Mr. Ergas was structurally separated from his company. But the Australian taxpayer is handing $44,000 to Griffith University for Mr. Robson's work. Well, Mr. Robson is not, unfortunately, the only alumni of Mr. Ergas's firm hired by Mr. Turnbull to put together his cost-benefit analysis stitch-up. Believe it or not, Ms. Acting Deputy President, there's more. Cost modelling is being done by Ms. Emma Lanigan, who has worked for Mr. Ergas for many years, first at Ergas and Associates, then at Network Economics Consulting Group, and finally, of course, at the failed company Concept Economics. Ms Alexis Harden is helping with cost modelling. Guess what, Ms Acting Deputy President? She worked at Mr Ergas's firm for 3 years between 2006 and 2009 and was chosen for her current role by, come on, you can go, Mr Henry Ergas. What a shock. But Madam Acting Deputy President, Mr Turnbull is ever cautious because that independence can rear its ugly head at any moment. So that's why people in support roles must be carefully selected. Of course, a standout, Mr Kevin Morgan, is such a selection. Now, he is being paid up to $57,000 by the taxpayer to work on the CBA. Mr Morgan is one of Australia's most voracious critics of the NBN. He is a key member of the Turnbull cheer squad, and Ms Acting Deputy President, perhaps the only person left in Australia who still believes that Telstra shouldn't be structurally separated. But it doesn't stop there. I know you'll find this hard to believe, Ms Acting Deputy President, because we have Mr David Kennedy and Nigel Pugh from Ovum Consulting, who've also been hired. And guess what? Nigel Pugh once worked for Mr Henry Ergas at Concept Economics, that failed company that Mr Ergas used to own. And what of Mr David Kennedy, you might ask? Well, he was once the Chief of Staff to former Liberals Communication Minister Richard Alston. And up to $75,000 of taxpayer money is being paid to this pair, Ms Acting Deputy President. But there's still one more base that we have to cover off. It's the peer review. There's no point, really, in going to the trouble and expense of selecting personnel to write the report you want when it could all be undone by a peer review. And so, Ms Acting Deputy President, Mr Turnbull has handed out $60,000 in taxpayer money to ensure that the CBA's peer review also comes to the correct conclusion. How do we know this? Well, one of the peer reviewers is Professor Pincus. He once claimed in the pages of The Australian, and I now quote, "The NBN is going ahead despite the remarkable premium customers place on mobility, the huge take-up of wireless technology and the saturation and even decline in fixed network connections." Well, unfortunately for Mr Pincus, ABS data on download trends shows precisely the opposite effect. The fact is, the percentage of data downloaded on fixed lines is increasing. It's gone from 93% of the total in December 2011 to 95% in December 2012 and to 96% in December 2013. That's right. Last time I checked in basic maths, 93% going up to 96% is in actual fact an increase. Mr Pincus, however, may be short on facts about the fixed telecommunications sector, Ms Acting Deputy President, but he doesn't let the facts get in the way of criticising the NBN. That's what makes him absolutely another perfect recruit for Mr Turnbull. And then you might think, I know, you might think it ends there. But, Ms Acting Deputy President, another of the peer reviewers, Clifford Winston, from the Brookings Institute, is also well known to, you've guessed it, Ms Acting Deputy President, Mr Henry Ergas. They taught a class together at the Smart Infrastructure Facility in Sydney in 2011. Everywhere you look, you can see Mr Turnbull's cronies, past associates and fellow travellers, and you love this speech, speech, Senator Fafadji Wells, you can sit there smiling quietly, and fellow travellers telling the minister exactly what he wants to hear. This is hardly a surprise. From the moment that Labor's NBN was announced, the Coalition's only policy has been to attack the NBN. In opposition, Mr Turnbull attacked the need for public investment, the need for an infrastructure monopoly, the presumed need for a cost-benefit analysis, the purchase of the satellites, the management of NBN Co, the board of NBN Co, NBN Co's performance against its targets. In short, Madam Acting Deputy President, Mr Turnbull has attacked the entire basis of the NBN, an attack that he has continued in government. Mr Turnbull has launched an unprecedented 6 reviews into the NBN. This is at a cost to the taxpayer of over $10 million. While the CBA is littered with yes men and yes women, many of the other 5 reviews are also headed or being written by Mr Turnbull's mates. They are all designed to attack the NBN and its implementation by the former government. The strategic review, which has been spoken of extensively in the Senate, written by Mr Turnbull's yachting buddy, owned a yacht with Mr Rousselot for 15 years, worked with him before he came into Parliament, all designed to attack the costs, the technology mix and deployment timeframe in the fixed line footprint. The Fixed Wireless and Satellite Review was designed to attack the costs, the technology mix and the deployment timeframe in the fixed wireless and satellite footprint. Never mind he had all that extra satellite capacity up there in the sky. He guaranteed us there was. And what he was able to pull together? A measly, measly extra amount, which we had already told him was there. The Broadband Availability and Quality Review was designed to attack the deployment schedule of the NBN. The Governance Review was designed to attack the previous board and management of NBN Co. And the Independent Audit is designed to attack the policy, deliberations and decisions of the previous government. And, Ms Acting Deputy President, it may come as a surprise to you that the audit I just mentioned's Secretariat is headed by another person likely to be well known to the Communications Minister. This person was the former Department of Environment public servant who worked on water policy at the department when Mr Turnbull was the Environment Minister. And you'll love this one, Senator Bernardi. This gentleman is very familiar with how Mr Turnbull operates. Can you all remember the $10 billion Murray-Darling scheme, Senator Bernardi, developed by Mr Malcolm Turnbull, announced by the Prime Minister Howard, and not once did it go to Cabinet. The Department of Finance said they saw one page of costings only, one page for $10 billion of water policy. Top-notch public policy there, Ms Acting Deputy President. And of course, there is the cost-benefit analysis, which is designed to attack Labor's NBN policy decision more broadly. As I have outlined, Ms Acting Deputy President, the CBA is being written by long-time associates of the Minister and people well known to be hypercritical of Labor's NBN. The other problem with the CBA is that it is clear that it's been put together to provide a post hoc justification for Mr Turnbull's second-rate network. I say post hoc, Ms Acting Deputy President, because Mr Turnbull has already given the NBN Co its marching orders to roll out this second-rate network without bothering to wait for the outcome of his hand-picked, paid-for review. That's right, $1 million and Mr Turnbull has already told the company what they've got to roll out and when they've got to roll it out by. This is a farce.
Thank you, Senator